day or so ago, Jamarl Thomas, did a video where I said the following. I was making the video in response to the way Bernie Sanders answered a question at the climate change forum. Because my thought was, okay, A, that woman is a lunatic, and B, that question is dangerous, and C, Sanders answered in the worst possible way because he wasn't necessarily paying attention to what she was asking him, and the way that he answered it allowed it to be framed in a particular way. He was very clear on what he was talking about if you just listen to the debate. The problem is CNN is a hostile actor, and there are a lot of people who greatly dislike him, and any opportunity to frame something in a particular way, they will take it. My video wasn't knocking Sanders. I think in the video I even made the point that what Sanders is saying may be technically right, but that's not really what she asked him. Let's take a look at this, because I'm going somewhere with this.
A crazed woman on a forum on CNN at the climate forum, where the candidates are getting up there instead of having a debate. They're just having a forum where people from the audience ask them questions and they answer the questions from the audience. In a climate forum, a woman who I honestly think it's a plant, or if the very least is somewhat crazed. And I was at a Bernie meeting when we were watching this, and I turned to my wife and said, what the hell is this? A crazed woman asked Bernie Sanders about population control. Essentially, Thanos. We need to curb and cut the population. This is such a weird, out of the blue question that none of the other candidates, if I'm not mistaken, was asked any kind of random shit like this. CNN is hostile enemy territory. And at various points in the debate, Anderson Cooper, who gave Joe Biden a softball, okay, Joe Biden, here's your question. I'm not really going to push back on you at all on this question, even though you are saying stuff that really should be pushed back on. But with Sanders, always trying to get a very particular framing so you can have that soundbite of Sanders says that there's going to be sacrifice among all Americans. That type of stuff. It was positioned that way multiple times. So Sanders, looking out for this stuff, for the most part, cut his language in a way that tries to prevent CNN from using any kind of out there sound bites to knock down what he was saying or to misrepresent what he was saying. Problem. The crazy lady that is talking about population and the way Bernie Sanders answered this question may be potentially problematic if it is misconstrued and used in a way that is misconstrued. Bernie Sanders is talking about one thing, but ultimately what that woman asked him is something a little bit different. She's talking about population control, like Thanos. And his answer, it's something to be desired.
Now, I'm not saying this to ding Sanders. I'm saying this to kind of make the point that the way Sanders answered the question was problematic. Why do I think it was problematic? Look at this. 2 days later, Washington Post. Bernie Sanders' formulation smacks of population control by limiting non-white births. Anybody that listened to what Sanders was answering knew what Sanders was talking about. But again, my point was it can be misconstrued as something else. And the Washington Post, who literally ran a paper saying, giving Sanders 3 Pinocchios for something that the author of the study told Washington Post that they are wrong on, when Sanders asked for a retraction, they blew him off. Propaganda rag, Washington Post. And it's not just the Washington Post. There'll be other articles and media organizations that are looking for ways to ding them, and they will use this particular video to do just that. Now, despite that, this is the New Hampshire Democratic Convention. That's them levying them some Bernie Sanders. The same one that they're talking about on the Washington Post is engaged or pushing for population control. Biggest applause of the night. Now, everybody was supposed to wave the signs of whoever was there because they're pushing this unity stuff. Now, if I am being brutally honest, I don't care about unity. I want Bernie Sanders to win. That is my objective. That is my goal. It has nothing to do with the other candidates that are in the race. If I have to crawl over their carcass to get Sanders in the win for the win, I will do just that. Unity, my ass. Especially with people like the Washington Post printing nonsense like this. They belong to a particular class. The established order of things. The Democratic Party as it is. Not as Sanders and as these people who are freaking out over that Bernie Sanders. They're not part of the class that these guys like. I want to let you hear some of Sanders' speech. It is a barn burner of a speech. If you remember, New Hampshire was the state that Bernie Sanders won the first time around, and many people were betting that Sanders wouldn't win any states, wouldn't even get close to winning any states. New Hampshire proved that to be wrong. He won that state, if I'm not mistaken, by 22 points. And so I want to show you part of the speech for Sanders. Barn burner. Welcome to Soapbox After Dark. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. I'd like to say Soapbox After Dark because it is almost midnight here. Guys, if you dig the content, like, share, subscribe. Of course, this channel is growing and it's growing because of you. Also, if you really dig the content, please consider supporting this content through PayPal or Patreon. It helps the show. All of these shows are at this point demonetized. And so the show is brought to you by you. In real terms. New Hampshire Democratic Convention. They love him. There may be some people who are voted for him back in 2016 and maybe voting for somebody else now, but still, they're feeling the burn. Clearly. Sanders gives a barn burner of a speech, and I am going to let you hear that speech. I'll take it over. Sanders, take it away. I'm not playing the entire part because part of it is the introduction. I'm getting it up to the point where he essentially goes into the main speech.
This country cannot continue to have a president who is a pathological liar, who even uses his Sharpie pen to lie about the direction of a hurricane. How crazy is that? We cannot continue to have a president who is corrupt, who is using his office to enrich himself and his family. We cannot continue to have a president who is a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a xenophobe, and a religious bigot. That is not what America is about. Together, we will make Donald Trump a one-term president.
Just to interrupt for the moment. I understand that he needs to be a peacenik. I mean, because for all intents and purposes, they don't consider him a Democrat. And ultimately, he needs to win in a primary of other Democrats. That may come down to dealing with people from the standpoint of getting the delegates, meaning the second round. He's already there's a prejudice against him, again, because he is already considered the person who's running against Clinton that they hated. And Clinton lost, and some of them blame him for it. Some of them don't even consider him a Democrat. Some of them look at this notion of a political revolution as not something that they want to be a part of. He needs to win it outright before it ever gets to the second round. He needs New Hampshire. He needs all of these places. And it's good to see that these guys are great about it. My objective is not to be a peacenik. My objective is not unity. My objective is for Sanders to win. I will be fair and honest in that process. I will not lie about any other candidates. I will not lie to you or the audience or anybody else. And, clearly, when he does something that I don't like, I knock him for it. This election that's coming up, in spite of me saying what I just said, it's a big deal. I mean, if Trump wins this next election, Medicare and Social Security are now on the chopping block, potentially, because Trump is going to say he has a mandate. The notion of foreign policy from the standpoint of the trade war, even from the standpoint of the foreign policy with places like North Korea, Iran, all of those gets into a hazy gray area because it's unclear on what Trump's intentions are after he wins the election and what he's going to do since he considers himself having a mandate. The issues that take place at the border, meaning immigration, again, those issues get worse, and the people who are in those situations essentially are that much more vulnerable. Those tax cuts, there may be even more on that sense because Trump doesn't necessarily want a recession, so he wants to keep juicing the economy despite financial people essentially saying that's a horrible idea. And even from the standpoint of things like climate and environment, workers' protections, the people he's going to put on the Supreme Court. And if Trump wins, Republicans will keep the Senate, and they will likely get the House. House, Senate, Supreme Court, all of it. They get it all. Entire kit and caboodle. No pressure. Choose correctly.
Frankly, it is not enough just to defeat Trump. We must do much, much more. We must finally create a government and an economy that works for all of us, not just the 1%. We must run a campaign of energy and excitement which brings young people and working people into the political process in a way we have never seen. And today, I want to personally thank the hundreds of volunteers in our campaign who are knocking on doors right here in Manchester. Thank you very much. And the reason we have got to transform our economy is that it is not acceptable that today in America, half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. It is not acceptable that our child care system is a disaster, that 87 million Americans are either uninsured or underinsured and cannot afford to go to a doctor when they need to.
I said before that Medicare for All is my red line. That is my litmus test. If I think the person is dodgy on it, if I don't believe the person is going to enact it, they will not get my vote. Flat, fact, absolute. Satan himself can be on the other side of that particular electorate. They will not get my vote. And if everybody else that wanted Medicare for All took the exact same temperament, you will have Medicare for All. The squishy people, the dodgy people, the people who are willing to put other people in there, be it out of fear or something else, for the most part, also hold up the process and gum up the works and actually getting a certain political will and momentum of putting Medicare for All through. My wife has insurance. She's not underinsured by any stretch of the imagination. She has better insurance than some other people would have it. She was having a medical issue. She goes to the doctor. The doctor sends her to a specialist. The specialist says, I want to do a test. Great. The specialist does a test to tell her something that she already, for the most part, knew. He was like, I just wanted to confirm it. Well, that's not what you really told us, but okay. I mean, even if it was something that you needed to confirm, fair enough. She gets a $1,300 bill from the specialist. She gets a $700 bill from the hospital that the test took. Meaning, the bill that you get from the guy who does the procedure is not the total bill. There's also other people that might have been part of the process that also send you bills. Even going through a law firm because it's been 2 months. Meaning for a 2-month-old bill, they're taking her to court where they are sending her notices. She has insurance. The next time she gets ill, what happens? Yeah, I'm not going to the doctor. Ideal. Why? Because in her mind, I don't want the bill. And not just I don't want a bill, I already have a bill. Every time you go to the doctor, that's a copay, that's a tax. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it a tax. Every time you get a prescription, you got to pay for it. Well, that's a particular price on it. But each time you go to the doctor, every time you have a procedure, if you have a minimum that you need to get to, meaning let's say $2,000 or $5,000, who the hell has $5,000 to pay for medical bills before the insurance company steps in? Or $2,500? Who the hell have $1,000? I'm talking about before the insurance even steps in, you have to pay that much. That is not under insurance. In many respects, that's just insurance. And in both of those situations, one, it creates a disincentive, and B, it hits the person with bills that they are dragged down by. 500,000 bankruptcies are caused by medical issues. The issue is really 530,000 each year, but 500,000. That number is actually correct, despite what the Washington Post came out with and said and essentially lied. I guess my point is, these things have real world consequences in people's lives, especially from the standpoint of the medical angle. The medical thing was one of the number one issues, if I'm not mistaken, the number one issue in that last election because people are being hounded by it. And that is after Obamacare. That's after Obamacare. And I haven't even gotten into mine, dealing with the clinic stuff. I guess I'm making the point that each and every person, to some degree, is going to end up with some kind of medical thing. And when you have the majority of the country that don't have $500 in the bank, then that gets a little dicey in dealing with medical bills. And right off the bat, there's a certain degree of insolvency and persistent vulnerability, especially when trying to pay those bills back. You had no choice in the matter. You didn't do anything wrong. And yet, here you are at this hospital. Or here you are avoiding going to the hospital. And that doesn't even touch people who say, I'm not going to get my insulin, or I'm not going to get this medication or that medication because I can't afford the bill. Sanders is right. This is my litmus test. I put it out there to also be yours.
It is not acceptable that we continue to be ripped off by the greed of the pharmaceutical industry that charges us the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. It is not acceptable to you or to me that in our great country, 500,000 people will be sleeping out on the streets tonight. Today in America, hundreds of thousands of bright young people cannot afford to go to college, and 45 million are struggling with student debt. Millions of seniors cannot make it on $12,000 or $13,000 a year Social Security, and veterans throughout this country are not able to access the health care and other benefits they are entitled to.
If you're working on mainstream media, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, you're making, $10 million a year. These are not your issues. These issues don't come up because these are not your issues. You don't even understand these issues for the most part. You get it intellectually, but in a real terms way. I have a grandmother, and that grandmother gets Social Security. How do you pay rent with that money? When we have seniors who work their entire life, giving their brains and their muscles and everything else for 60 years of their life, should they be able to retire in a way that is not vulnerable? Meaning, who could live off of $13,000? And I'm talking about Social Security, a Social Security check each month. After living and working all of that time, who can live off of that? And I know people say, well, Social Security is not meant to live off. Fair enough, but at the point where people are literally living paycheck to paycheck for the entirety of their life, how can you live off it? You're stuck with what you got, right? Is it fair that a society essentially accepts all of the resources of that particular individual, but then allows that person to retire in persistent vulnerability? I don't think it is. I think that's a big deal. When we're talking about people going to school, what's more advantageous for society? If kids, all of them, any of them, can go to school to the degree that they want to go to school and maximize their own potential from an education standpoint, or a system that incentivizes to not do that. Meaning, you hold a degree out in front of the person and says, look, if you want your chance to the middle class, it's just a chance. Give me $50,000. Sign your life away. And that person is stuck in a situation where, to some degree, they almost feel like they have to sign it if they want to have any chance of having a relatively decent life. But why should that be used in that way? Why should we be raping children who never at any point had the opportunity to deal with the outside world, had the chance to deal with the house, all that stuff, and we are going to benefit from the skills that they get from that, be it from companies that they start or organizations to which they work? What's more advantageous? Do you get more talent in your society when you have an open school system, meaning people can go to school, or at the very least you have publicly funded colleges and schools where people can go to school without $50,000 of debt? I guarantee you, if you're looking to maximize the potential of the individuals in your society, allowing them to go to school will do it. This is not talked about because this was not on the agenda of people who are in the media who essentially don't have these vulnerabilities. And I'm sorry, he's just making good points.
Meanwhile, while so many Americans are struggling, the very wealthy and large corporations have never had it so good. Aided and abetted by the Trump administration. Well, we have a different vision.
Not just Trump, buddy.
Than Trump and the Republicans.
And the Democratic Party.
If you work 40 hours a week in this country, you should not live in poverty. We're going to raise that minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour.
And just for people who think that increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour is going to create some level of inflation, I was called a loaded weapon in regards to my wife and her conversations. And her feeling some kind of way about me being around one of her friends. In case some random person stumbles upon this particular video and we're talking about increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour, as a worker and as somebody who's part of the 99%, you should want the minimum wage increased to 99%. It's always a weird argument to me that, oh man, if you increase that guy's wages to $15 an hour, I mean, that would be near my wages and I'm making $16 an hour. That doesn't seem fair to me at all. As opposed to looking at it as maybe your wages need to be higher. Maybe your wages need to be higher. Maybe your wages are artificially suppressed because that allows a certain expropriation of wealth to the top. How about that? How about looking at the world from the standpoint of the 99%, the class to which you exist in, as opposed to looking for ways to fight for the 1%. They don't need your help. Actually, they do. But I'm saying they don't. They've dumped trillions into the economy, into the banks. There's been no inflation. And beyond that point, you only get inflation if you're chasing things that don't exist. So say for the moment that Sanders says, yeah, everybody can go to school. And in saying everybody can go to school, now you have a rush on schools. And you don't have enough room in the schools for all of those people, including things like books and tables and chairs and so forth. And so wood and tables and chairs start to go up in price because you need those things in order to go in school. And school goes up in price because all of these people now want to go to school. You get inflation when it's chasing something that doesn't exist, or it's chasing something that creates a pressure in regards to the number of people who are trying to get fewer and fewer resources. That's not what we're talking about. Most of those people, when you're going to increase the minimum wage, are going to be spent on food. It's going to be spent on transportation. It's going to be spent on childcare. They're going to dump that money into the bottom rung of the economy, and that is going to end up in the upper parts of the economy, allowing for more money to be sloshing about. You're not talking about inflation in this particular scenario. You're talking about more money being dumped into the bottom part of the economy, which is exactly where it needs to be, as opposed to those tax cuts that were going to the top 1% who just put it in the bank. If you're talking about the momentum of money, this notion that allowing money to move and flow, then putting it in the bottom parts of the economy, essentially increasing the minimum wage of people who are going to dump it immediately into the economy, is the way to go. This notion of arguing inflation for this is nonsense. It's senseless, actually. And it's treacherous and even traitorous talk from the standpoint of class.
We believe in equal pay for equal work.
I've I've been talking over this, so I'm going to start this from where I began at first and just let Sanders do his thing.
Continue to have a president who is corrupt, who is using his office to enrich himself and his family. We cannot continue to have a president who is a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a xenophobe, and a religious bigot. That is not what America is about. Together, we will make Donald Trump a one-term president. But frankly, it is not enough just to defeat Trump.
I'm sorry. I would imagine the Democratic Party hates it when he says that. Because ultimately saying, look, Trump is horrible, we got to get rid of Trump. But frankly, it's not enough about beating Trump. There's more to it than that. Which kind of goes against this notion that any blue will do, right? Because if any blue will do, then it is frankly not. It is frankly is about beating Trump. I hope you understand what I mean. To say, but frankly, this goes beyond beating Trump. Okay, if any blue will do, then there is no frankly anything. It's any blue will do. In this speech, Sanders makes the point that he kind of goes back on what he said prior by adding the frankly in. It's like adding a but. But we need more than just beating Trump. I'm glad he adds that in.
We must do much, much more. We must finally create a government and an economy that works for all of us, not just the 1%. We must run a campaign of energy and excitement which brings young people and working people into the political process in a way we have never seen. And today, I want to personally thank the hundreds of volunteers in our campaign who are knocking on doors right here in Manchester. Thank you very much. And the reason we have got to transform our economy is that it is not acceptable that today in America, half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. It is not acceptable that our child care system is a disaster, that 87 million Americans are either uninsured or underinsured and cannot afford to go to a doctor when they need to. It is not acceptable that we continue to be ripped off by the greed of the pharmaceutical industry that charges us the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. It is not acceptable to you or to me that in our great country, 500,000 people will be sleeping out on the streets tonight. Today in America, hundreds of thousands of bright young people cannot afford to go to college, and 45 million are struggling with student debt. Millions of seniors cannot make it on $12,000 or $13,000 a year Social Security, and veterans throughout this country are not able to access the health care and other benefits they are entitled to. Meanwhile, while so many Americans are struggling, the very wealthy and large corporations have never had it so good, aided and abetted by the Trump administration. Well, we have a different vision for America than Trump and the Republicans. We believe that if you work 40 hours a week in this country, you should not live in poverty. We're going to raise that minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. We believe in equal pay for equal work. And we believe that it should be easier for workers to join unions, not harder. At a time...
Just so we're clear, though, some of this stuff becomes incentives. Like, if you're a company, you don't want unions. You hate unions. If you are, let's say, Walmart, if you are Amazon, for that matter, if you're Google, think about what a union does. A union allows for you not to have that unilateral power within the relationship to which you are dealing with. Meaning, if Walmart has a union, that union is going to organize those workers, and those workers are going to push for higher wages, for better opportunities, and all that stuff. Walmart does not want to do that. Labor is already one of its largest expenses, meaning any company. And having to pay workers more is something that they do not necessarily want to do. It is not necessarily in their best interest because, again, they want to expropriate the wealth to the top. And they can't do that if labor is insisting on additional benefits or, for that matter, additional pay. He has a plan to do this, but that is not necessarily something that companies naturally gravitate towards.
Of massive income and wealth inequality, when 3 people in America own more wealth than the bottom half, we got bad news for the 1% and profitable corporations. Under our administration, they will begin to pay their fair share of taxes. Under our administration, we will end the international embarrassment of being the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a human right. We will pass a Medicare for all single-payer program. Under our administration, we will make public colleges and universities tuition-free. And we will cancel all student debt in this country. People should not be punished simply because they sought a higher education. And yes, unlike Donald Trump, we believe that climate change is real and is an existential threat to the future of our country and the world. And I am proud to have introduced the most comprehensive climate change plan ever introduced by any candidate in the history of this country. Today, we say to the fossil fuel industry, your short-term profits are not more important than the future of this planet. And today, we say that we will bring major reforms to a broken and racist criminal justice system. Under our administration, the United States will not continue to have more people in jail than any other country on earth.
You know, I want you to go back and look at those old speeches. Not really, I'm just saying. Hillary Clinton speeches or Beto speeches, any of these guys' speeches. Those speeches all policy. There's no fluff in this speech at all. He's like, we are going to have Medicare for all. Yeah. We are going to ensure that there's an expansion of Social Security. We're going to make sure that there are public colleges. Very declarative statements of this is exactly what we are going to do when we get in office. And by the way, he doesn't think of these in terms of one or the other, like what's first and second and third. He thinks of all of this as we need to do everything at once. Swing for the rafters.
And yes, together we will bring major reform to a broken immigration system, comprehensive immigration reform, a path towards citizenship, and making sure the 1.8 million young people in Dhaka once again have legal protection. And we will develop a humane policy at the border. No more grabbing children, babies from the arms of their mothers. And yes, we believe proudly that it is a woman who controls her own body, not politicians. And yes, we believe that gun safety legislation must be passed immediately, and that the Congress must do what the American people want, not what the NRA wants. This is an unprecedented moment in American history, and we need an unprecedented response. Together, we are going not only to win this election, but together we are going to build an unprecedented grassroots movement. Trump wants to divide us up. We're going to bring our people together, black and white, Latino, Native American, Asian American, gay and straight, immigrant, native born. And we're going to bring our people together around an agenda that says that this great country, our government and our economy, belong to all of us, not just wealthy campaign contributors. Thank you all very much.
I love that. I love that. Because the wealthy campaign contributors thing hits both. That's not a singular thing. That's both. And everybody who's essentially getting those donations is somehow tarred by that last statement that Bernie Sanders gave, including Warren, who will be accepting campaign donations after if she gets out the primary. Yeah, if she gets out the primary. One thing that needs to be noted there, grassroots. My wife has been working for the Bernie Sanders campaign. I went and I thought it was a little dicey working with the campaign and doing the radio show. If Bernie Sanders does something, I want to be able to put a knife in Bernie Sanders without people looking at me with daggers when I go to the next meeting. However, she's still working with the Sanders camp. Sanders is building a grassroots volunteer army all throughout the United States that's scaffolding on his own stuff, meaning he has his own campaign. He has his own campaign offices and all of this other stuff, but he simultaneously has a volunteer army that works on his behalf. This is going to be instrumental in getting Medicare for All passed, because what I guarantee you is Bernie Sanders' campaign offices probably will not shut down at the end of the campaign. Those offices, the volunteer offices, will probably be pushing and cajoling Democratic senators and House of Representatives to do what he wants. Because if he goes through a primary and wins, takes down 20 other people, kind of like Trump did, and then he turns around and beats Trump, despite all of the money that's going to be dumped into this particular process, all of the propaganda, all of the ads, all of the oil and gas and drug industry cash, everything is going to be used to take him down. And if he wins, that is called a mandate. And if he wins, it is most likely that he will also win the Senate. This is almost an opposite of Trump. If Trump wins, he wins it all. If Sanders wins, it is also possibly he wins it all. They already have the House of Representatives. If he takes the presidency, it is very possible he's going to take the Senate along with him. What Democrat? What Democrat? With Sanders setting this agenda of what he wants from the standpoint of Medicare for all, after the Sanders wins this race, what Democrat goes out and says, yeah, I'm not going to push for that? Some might, and I suspect those people will be eaten alive. And you would have others who are a little bit more spineless, who will look at it kind of like Republicans were looking at Trump and decide to go along. Meaning what Sanders is looking at from the standpoint of Medicare for All doesn't require 60 votes. He's looking at reconciliation in order to make that work and to pass Medicare for All. He's looking at pathways to get all of this stuff through. And he is not looking at this from a standpoint of, I need to do one to the next. He's looking at it not in an incremental fashion, but in, I think, the more sane fashion. If you get in office, you need to do it all. Get everything that you possibly can, because you only get 8 years to do it, and there's no way to be certain, A, that the person who's going to run behind you, but B, the person who takes it over is going to follow your line. You need to become somewhat of an icon in that office where you set a new example that they follow. This is a hegemonic shift in what it means to be a Democrat if Sanders wins. There's also this other extra bonus that the Republican Party, if it's going to compete, will have to move to the left. You will end up with Republicans who are trended further to the left. They will get more moderate because those Republicans are going to have to orient themselves to the new status of what it means to be a Democrat. Democrats did the exact same thing with Ronald Reagan in office. Exact same thing. Clinton was a Democratic clone of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan reoriented politics. Thatcher did it in the UK. I'm making a point that the same thing is true here. We have the opportunity for something major. That said, we have the opportunity also for something infinitely miserable with Trump winning again. Both, at this moment, are possible. Beto sounds like Napoleon Dynamite on coke. Jay Vale, that is hilarious. Rob R., you got to read Listen Liberal by Thomas Frank. I've read part of that. I have the book in my book thing, but I don't think I read everything in it. I've seen several lectures that Thomas Frank gave on this particular book, and including several interviews that he gave on this particular book. Thomas Frank is right, and he's dead on right. Thomas Frank makes this argument about Bill Clinton and that and the drug bill that he passed through, the crime bill. And Bill Clinton knew that crime bill was going to have a disparity from the standpoint of blacks and whites, and he still put it through anyway. Now, as an African American that looks at that, why would I ever vote for Bill Clinton or anybody that was associated with it like a Joe Biden? Listen Liberal is awesome because Listen Liberal makes this very specific point of you have let people down. You have become the corporate party, and people aren't insane for calling you the corporate party. Obama throwing his body on the banks in order to protect the banks while homeowners went bust. That's astonishing. Obama's entire campaign or the cabinet being chosen by Citigroup while he's out there bashing the banks. He was gaslighting. He was not being all that honest. He sold you a bill of goods. The catch here is Donald Trump is doing the exact same thing for the Republican Party. And us lefties who try to tap Trump voters on the shoulder and say, hey, you know he's fucking you, right? You know he's not, he's nonsense. We've been through it too. It took us 8 years. We're trying to help you out early. Yeah. Kip Winter. New Hampshire primary, Bernie got 42,000 more votes than Trump. Wow. And by the way, it's not just New Hampshire primary. Look at this. So if you go to areas that Trump beat Clinton on, Sanders crushes. Yeah, right here. In 29 out of 30 polls, Bernie beats Trump. Crushes him. But in areas that Trump won, Sanders kills. Like I've made this argument that Bernie Sanders matches up extremely well with Trump in a way that undermines Trump's main benefits. And Trump was concerned from the standpoint of Joe Biden. And my argument was Biden or Sanders kind of does that. If you're going to be scared of anybody or concerned about anybody, Sanders is the guy you need to be concerned about. I can't find it. But it was a chart showing the amount that was being raised in areas that Trump won, but Sanders was doing amazing in. He was doing amazing in. All right. It's after midnight. I haven't eaten today, so I'm going to go eat dinner. barn burn over speech, man. And I know I interrupt the speech a lot, but I put the link at the bottom so you guys can see the speech in its entirety if you want to see the speech in its entirety without me interrupting the speech. But there's things I like to add to the speech just because it's connecting thoughts. That's all. Sanders, barn burner for speech. Good job. Good job. All right. Sounded like the same old speech to me, Zolix. Well, he gets a finite amount of time. Look, you get a finite amount of time to make a point. And as opposed to like a Hillary Clinton speech where she's like, we're going to build a better future till tomorrow. Yeah. And we're going to build a bridge across the sea for climate. Yeah. Like, it's not that nonsense. He's been very specific in what he's saying. All of these things are policy objectives. And he literally for 12 minutes just gives you policy. How are you complaining about that? How are you complaining about that? You talked about it. It was better than this one. Okay, fair enough. We all have our critics. Fair enough. Sanders needs to stop with this everyone is my friend BS. I agree with you, but to a point, like, I mean, you have a political issue, right? You have two problems. One, they don't consider you a Democrat. And maybe three problems. B, some of them even think that you hurt Hillary Clinton, especially the women in the party. Three, you need their support. There are problems. You have to figure that out. He needs to put a knife in some people, but he has to do it in a way that comes across where he's not being mean-spirited. He has to be above politics. Like, to some degree, look, if it was me and I had my own political will, I would implant somebody in Sanders' camp that is a dark horse. That dark horse would do things that Sanders shouldn't get his hands on. And that dark horse would go after people, maybe in somewhat of a more strident way, and go through with certain plans to try to hurt the other candidates. But that's me. That's the way I think of politics. And I like Sanders, and my concern with Sanders is more of an ethics thing. That he's too ethical in the process of people who are not all that ethical. And this belief that ethics wins out. They don't. Not always, anyway. You need that dark horse. Superman needs his Batman. He gives policy speeches because that's the way he thinks. This is what I'm going to do when I get into office. If you give him a longer speech, he'll probably go more into detail, but it's what you get. That crowd loved it. And I don't know what the other people were saying, but he is telling you literally what he is planning on doing without any hedge, without any backstop, without anything. How can you hate that? How can you not like that? It's awesome. Well, personally, I like the speech. So I'm going to go with that. You guys are got critics everywhere. All right. Like, share, subscribe. Bernie kills it. At least I think he does. These are speeches that I get. I love these speeches because it's not nonsense. It's, what are you going to do when you get in office, Sanders? All right, here are the 10 things that I'm going to do. And all of those things are transformative. And not just that, all of those things are clear and present problems for people who are a part of the 99%. And these are things that the media doesn't touch. Under normal circumstance, they don't touch. The Democratic Party talked about what for the last 3 years? Trump and Russia. How many times did he mention Trump in that speech? He mentioned it in the beginning, and after that, policy. How can you not like that? How can you not like that? Love that. Love that. I'll end it here. Like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. Thanks all.